How about I say welcome, and then Lily says to, and then Ian says the, and then you say knowing, and then I say God.
And then we all say together, podcast!
Yeah.
Okay, that's enough. Don't do that. How, Grayson?
What if this was live? We cannot do this live.
Yo, is this because I'm used to like college degrees and all that stuff, you know? Welcome
to the
Knowing
God
Podcast.
Okay,
This interview's over.
I didn't do that right. Grayson, you gotta be up here, man. No. Okay, now you do it.
to.
No, you say welcome. Stay down here. Say welcome. Grayson, stop. Say it the right way.
Say
Mom, will you tell him
welcome.
to say it the right way?
No, can I listen to this when we're done?
Welcome to episode number 53 of the Knowing God podcast for kids. My name is Erin, and I have a little helper with me today. Who are you, little helper?
Grayson.
Hi, Grayson. Gray, what is one of your favorite snacks to eat, especially when you're watching a movie?
Goldfish.
Yes, you like those little goldfish crackers, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember about a week ago, you were about out of goldfish, and I went to the store and they didn't have any? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
The shelf where the goldfish normally are in the store was completely empty. And when that happens, when they are completely out of something in the store, we would say that it is out of stock. So your goldfish were out of stock that day. Especially in the last couple of months, that has been happening a lot. In America, for example, toilet paper was out of stock for a long time, and things like hand sanitizer, those are still out of stock in a lot of places. So today we are going to talk about people being in stock or out of stock. Do you think that's possible? Can people be in stock?
No.
You don't think so? Okay, so first we're going to look at a story in the Bible, and then I'll explain what I mean, okay?
Okay.
So I am going to turn to the book of 1 Samuel, and we're going to talk about something that happens in chapter 3 of that book. Do you remember who Samuel is?
No, not really.
Okay, God's people had made it to the promised land that was called Canaan, and they had conquered most of the people who lived there, but not all of them. And in Judges 21, it says that everyone did what was right in their own eyes. They did what they thought was right, but they weren't listening to God and they were doing bad things. And so Samuel was born during a time when people were not listening to God. In 1 Samuel 3:1, it says, when Samuel was a boy, the word of the Lord was rare. In other words, people did not hear from God very often during that time because their sin got in the way. But one day something happened to Samuel when he was just a child. So there are two people in this story. There's Samuel, who is the boy, and there's Eli, who is the priest. One night, they lay down to go to sleep, and let's see what happens, okay?
Okay.
Okay, so starting in verse 4, it says, Then the Lord called Samuel, and Samuel said, Here I am, and ran to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. But Eli said, I did not call you. Lie down again. So Samuel went and lay down. And the Lord called again, Samuel. And Samuel arose and went to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. But Eli said, I did not call you, my son. Lie down again. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. And the Lord called Samuel again the third time. And he arose and went to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. Then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, Go, lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, Speak, Lord, for your servant hears. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. And the Lord came and stood, calling, like the other time, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel said, Speak, for your servant hears. Then the Lord said to Samuel, behold, I am about to do a thing in Israel at which the 2 ears of everyone who hears it will tingle. Okay, so then God actually goes on to give Samuel a special message about Eli and his sons. But what we want to talk about is how God was speaking to Samuel. Okay, so how many times did God call Samuel's name?
3.
Well, it was 3 times that he went to Eli. And said the 3rd time, Eli finally realized what was happening. And so,
4.
Yeah, so then he actually called 4 times. When Samuel was ready to hear from God, that's when God spoke to him. So this was during a time when there were no video games or television or movies, but let's pretend that those things were there just for a minute, okay? So let's pretend that Samuel laid down in bed and he was playing on his tablet or he was watching a movie. Do you think that he would have heard God say his name?
No.
So I'm not saying that tablets or movies or games are always bad, but Samuel heard God speaking to him because he was listening, because he wasn't distracted by other things. The Bible also says in verse 7 that Samuel did not yet know the Lord when God was calling his name. So Samuel had never heard from God before. And he didn't quite understand who was talking to him at first, did he? But as soon as he did understand and he said, Lord, I'm listening, then God spoke to him and gave him a special message. So now let's go back to people being in stock.
But when he was calling them over and over again, you would think that he would be listening because he was listening to see if he would keep calling them.
Yeah, I think he was listening. But he didn't quite understand who was talking to him because God had never spoke to him before. So he was trying to hear, but he just didn't quite understand until Eli told him what was happening. Right?
Right.
Yeah. So let's go back to talking about people being in stock or out of stock, okay? When we talk about that story with Samuel, do you think that he was in stock?
Yes.
Why do you think that?
Because he was listening.
Because he was listening? Okay.
Uh-huh. And he was listening, and then when he called them, he was still, and then he said lay down. He was listening, and then he finally found out it was God, and then he was in stock, and he was...
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's right. He was prepared and he was ready to hear from God. And he wasn't distracted by other things, or you could say that he was available. So what do you think it means when someone is out of stock?
When they're, when they don't believe in God, and they just believe in, evolution.
So when we say someone is out of stock, that means they are not available. Kind of like if you were to go to the store and goldfish is out of stock. Oh, there's no goldfish available. They're not here. But we're not just talking about the people who don't believe in Jesus. Because even you and me, we both believe in Jesus, right?
Right.
But we can be out of stock.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not just talking about believing in Jesus, but we're talking about maybe we are not really thinking about God. And maybe we're distracted. Maybe we're not paying attention to what we should pay attention to. And so that means we're out of stock. We're not available. We're not available to God. And we have not put ourselves in a way where we can hear from God because we're paying too much attention to other things. So let's think about something else. Earlier, I mentioned that certain things are out of stock, like goldfish, right? So what would happen if I walked into the store and everything was out of stock? There wasn't anything. It wasn't just goldfish. It was milk and bread and cereal and flour and everything. The whole store was empty. What would we do? Everything was out of stock.
Well, if they weren't keep delivering it there, then the business would just run out of business.
Oh, yeah, but what would we do? How would we get our food?
Well, God would provide us it.
I like that answer. That's a good answer. Maybe we would go to another store. What if they were out of food too?
God would still provide us it.
Well, that's a good answer, Grayson. We know that if everything was out of stock in the grocery stores, it would not be a good thing, right?
Right.
Yes. It would make it harder to find food. So now let's talk about people again and people being out of stock. What if not just a few people here and there were out of stock and not available to hear from God? What if everybody in the whole world was out of stock and no one was listening to God? What would the world be like?
Well, it would be a lot of sin.
So we know that when...
And especially if no one was praying either, reading the Bible.
Yes, that we know that would not be a good thing. So we know that when someone needs something, and let's say they pray and they ask God to help them in some way. So you know what God does? He speaks to other people, and he uses people to help other people. Mm-hmm. But what if everybody was out of stock and no one was listening to God? Would anybody be able to help anybody else?
No.
No, that would not be a good thing.
There would be like lots of robberies, and there would be lots of sin.
Maybe so. Maybe you're right. So we know that when we are out of stock and we're not paying attention and we're not ready to listen to God, that it's not only bad for us, but it's bad for other people too. Mm-hmm. Right?
Right.
Okay. So in Proverbs 4:20, it says, "My son, pay attention to what I say. Turn your ear to my words." So it's your choice what you listen to and what you pay attention to. Listening to God is not something that's going to happen on accident. You have to do it on purpose. You have to listen to God on purpose.
Like if you didn't believe in God at all, you can do like, oh, I accidentally heard him.
Yes. Yeah, it normally does not happen like that. Do you remember when Jesus walked on water?
Yes.
The Bible says when he did, he walked on water and he got on the boat with the disciples and the storm stopped. It says the disciples were amazed. They were amazed beyond measure and they marveled. And they just couldn't believe that Jesus walked on water. And you know why they were so surprised? In Mark 6, verse 52, it says, they were so surprised because they had hard hearts. Their hearts were hardened. Now, it might sound like if we say someone has a hard heart, that we might be talking about somebody who doesn't believe in Jesus, but we know the disciples did believe in Jesus, right? They believed that Jesus was God, but it says they were surprised because they had a hard heart. So even when we believe in Jesus, we can still have parts of our heart that are hardened towards God. And it's because we might be thinking about things in this world. And we might be paying attention to things in this world. And we're not thinking about godly things. We're not thinking about God or things that the Bible says about God. So I'm not just talking about reading our Bible for 5 minutes when we wake up in the morning. I'm talking about always being aware that God is with you and making decisions based on what God wants you to do. That everything you do all day long, you have God on your mind. It doesn't mean you can't do anything else, but you can do things and still have God on your mind. Mm-hmm. You should never go hours and hours and hours with not even giving God a thought at all. And the disciples were thinking about things that, oh, how are we going to get out of the storm? We got to get off this boat. And they weren't expecting Jesus to walk on water, even though they had seen Jesus feed thousands of people with just very little food. They weren't thinking about what Jesus had done and the miracles that done. They were thinking about the storm. Mm-hmm. They were thinking about the bad things in this world instead of thinking about what Jesus could do.
When the Israelites went to Egypt, when they got out of it, they said, "Oh, I would rather go back to Egypt than this."
They did. They were thinking about the wrong things, weren't they? And they were complaining. They had just seen God part the Red Sea, right? Do all those miracles where all the plagues happened to the Egyptians, but the Israelites were saved. God's people were saved, and they weren't thinking about those things. They weren't thinking about what God could do. They were just thinking about all the bad stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had hard hearts. That's a good example. You're right. And so we have a choice what we think about. We have a choice what we listen to. And if we're not paying attention to what we should, then we are out of stock, just like your goldfish was out of stock.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not going to be able to hear from God.
Well, now we have plenty.
We do have plenty of goldfish, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
So if our listeners are sitting there and they're thinking, I have never heard God say anything to me, what do you think that they should do? Do you think you're too young? You're just a little kid, so God's not going to talk to you?
No.
And did you notice in our story that Samuel, he was just a boy?
Mm-hmm.
And God spoke to him.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't quite understand it at first, did he?
Yeah.
But God knew that he was trying to hear. He went to Eli and said, did you call me? He was trying to figure out who was talking to him.
Mm-hmm.
And God didn't just stop talking to him. He spoke to him how many times?
4.
4 times.
But the 3rd time, that's when he actually found out what was going on.
Yes, he did. And so God knew that he was trying. He knew what was in Samuel's heart. He knew he was trying to hear. And he was in stock. He was ready to hear. He wanted to. And so if you've never heard from God, you need to try to get rid of anything that's hard in your heart. So if you're thinking about bad things, or you're thinking about, oh, this or that, and you spend all your time complaining, you need to change what you think about and start thinking about good things.
Just like when the Israelites wanted to go back to Egypt.
Yes, you need to start thinking about what God can do and what God promises to do, instead of thinking about all the bad things. Get rid of all the hard stuff in your heart. That's one thing that we can do, right?
Right.
And then we need to control what we think about, and we need to make sure that we're paying attention to the right things. God knows if you're really trying and if you really want to hear from him. Just like he knew that Samuel really wanted to hear. And so he's not going to stop talking to you. He's going to keep calling you and calling your name, just like he did with Samuel, even if you don't quite understand what's going on at first. But you have to make yourself available. You have to put yourself in stock, just like the goldfish.
Mm-hmm.
And give your attention to God. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you so much for listening. You can go to our website, hideandseekministries.com/podcast. You will find a free printable worksheet to review what we've talked about today. You will also find several other printables and some books that you can get while you are on our website. Is that it?
Mm-hmm. I think so.
Okay. Thank you again for listening, and we hope you join us again on the next episode of the Knowing God podcast for kids.
Bye.
Okay, Grayson, do you have a goldfish joke?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's hear it.
What happens when there's no goldfish in stock?
What?
There's gold in the ground.
I don't get it.
The goldfish turn into gold in the ground.
Oh. That doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't.